morning and welcome to another Bird News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and with us today is Denton Williams, Chief Executive of the Regulatory Authority. Welcome, Denton.
Good morning. How are you doing, Don?
I'm doing great, thank you. For those who don't know, what does the RA do? We'll start off with something simple.
So thanks, Don. So the RA is responsible for regulating sectors that are assigned to it. So it regulates electronic communications, electricity, and submarine cables at this point.
Okay. So recently, yesterday, the RA had a press release and they lowered the retail tariff rate. Most people know what the fuel adjustment rate is, but what's what the tariff rate tied to?
That's tied to what we would consider the base rates for electricity. So those are the rates not included in fuel. So that would be the cost to cover power plants, transmission lines, distribution cables, meters to your house, etc. So those are the pieces of equipment and also the operating expenses to maintain them and keep them operating.
So how does the RA decide whether that goes up or down?
Well, the first instance, the RA requests Belco to submit a tariff case, and they provide their information of what they believe is prudently incurred costs to deliver service to Bermuda. And then the RA looks at those costs, and they consist of capital expenditures to build new cables, as an example, or operating expenses like employing people to maintain generators. And then, their allowed return, which is their weighted average cost of capital, and all of those, and fuel, can't forget that, that's not minor. And all of those are put together to come up with an outcome. And sometimes we agree on some items and sometimes we disagree.
Now, I know you put like a percentage into the press release of what people could on average see. For the average consumer, residential consumer, for the whole course of the whole year, how much in dollar savings do you expect that they would get back?
Well, ultimately, it depends on the customer. So a customer that uses say $1,000 over the course of the year, the average reduction is 1.6%, so that would be $16 on average, I guess. But it really depends. So in some cases, if you look at the individual classes, the savings can be higher. Some cases slightly lower. So the residential reduction is about 1.7%. The commercial is 1.8%, and I believe the demand class is 1.4% reduction. So
now, this is great news. People will get some discount on the tariff rate, but you may not see any break in their Belco bill because the price of crude oil per barrel has been up more than 33% since January. And from a year ago, we're looking at $29 a barrel to $65 today. How would you explain to people who are expecting to see some relief and unlikely to see it because of crude oil prices?
Well, I mean, we really can only speak to what we have the ability to control. We can't control global oil markets. We can have some impact on efficient use of resources in Bermuda, but externally, we try to, as much as possible, help with the offset of some of the base rates to offset some of the projected oil increases. But if there was some significant spike in prices, other than just the raw volatility, there's not too much that can be done because we don't set prices in the global markets, and we're a taker. We're not a seller. We're a buyer, and we're a very small buyer. We have no negotiating power of any significance. So, and then also in the fuel part of it, there's a significant amount of infrastructure, pipelines, storage, etc., that also need to be operated and maintained. So on the fuel side, we don't have as much impact as we would like, mainly because most of the controls or items are beyond our ability. But in terms of the raw electricity production, transmission, distribution, and retailing, we do have the ability to influence that. So we've exercised that in this case.
Now, for residential users, the tariff rate went down 3.6% across all categories. Is that correct?
Yes, that's about right, and that's for the remainder of the year. And the 1.6 that I mentioned is for the entire bill. The 3.6 is for just the base rates. So you have different components to your bill. You have the facilities charge, which is a fixed charge. Then you have the base rates, which we just mentioned, went down by 3.6 for residential. And then you have the fuel adjustment, and of course, the one that finances our operations is the regulatory authority fee. So you add all of those together, and over the course of the year, the reduction is 1.6%.
Right. Was there any consideration given to that people in the lower bands might get like more of a discount than the people in the higher bands?
Actually, that's already in place. So we have a tiered structure, and the initial blocks of energy are more cost effective at the lower bands. So fundamentally, heavy energy users pay a bit more than lower to moderate energy users. So that structure already exists. We are planning to do a multi-year retail tariff review. And so our reviews to this date have been just annual reviews. We're going to do a 3-year review next. And we will also be looking at the structures of the existing tariffs, so base rates. And we'll also be introducing new rates, such as public electric vehicle charging tariffs, hopefully a low-income tariff, and an economic development tariff that would be available to companies that decide to domicile in Bermuda.
Do you feel like the electric vehicle market's going to be expanding and that needs more look at?
Yes, I do think it's going to expand, but we also need to make sure that there is the appropriate infrastructure there to support it. If not, it will be, early adopters only. You won't get mass adoption. It really is a beneficial thing long term in that it helps to spread the fixed costs of the infrastructure. So the same equipment that you have today largely can meet the needs of electric vehicle charging. So if you have more customers covering the same cost or moderately smaller increase in costs, it can result in reducing the pressure on all the other customer classes. So that's why it's a no-brainer in that sense. And then you can get into other discussions about how, as you bring more and more renewable energy on board, the transportation sector actually gets improved as well.
Right. Now, going back to the tariff rate, what thought went into rate decreases for commercial business users?
Well, we weren't specifically looking for commercial business users. The approach was to look at the entire economy and try and provide some relief, knowing that not only had people been made unemployed or had difficulty executing their businesses, but just the ability to transact was reduced significantly. So earnings, whether they be wages or whether they were corporate income, were lower. So we were trying to at least do our bit to help the country navigate the fallout from COVID-19.
Let's move on to 5G. It was finally approved by the RA. What were the concerns that you were investigating that the public brought forth, and what were your results of your investigation?
The primary concern with 5G was that it would cause negative health impacts of a variety of types. And we conducted a public consultation that allowed people to submit to 2 rounds of consultation. One also had a virtual town hall, if you will. And that allowed the public to provide its input to the RA. And the RA appointed an advisory panel. And the advisory panel looked at the submissions. The RA staff also looked at what was submitted. And then ultimately a recommendation was provided from the panel to the Board of Commissioners. And the Board of Commissioners made its decision to lift the moratorium on 5G. with certain controls being implemented. Simultaneously, the RA also conducted an island-wide RF study to look at the impact of radio frequency in Bermuda. And we found that the levels of exposure in Bermuda were very low. And so we don't feel that there's any significant issues, and certainly that it's very safe in Bermuda. And we wish to keep it that way and have implemented some controls that would facilitate that.
When you say very low, what do you mean by that?
So the absolute highest point of exposure was 4% of 3% of the FCC's standard, and about 4 to 5%, or just under 5%, of the IEEE standard and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection standard. So in all cases is very low. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to keep it safe. So we've actually implemented some controls so that new deployments will need to have a pre-commissioning study where they will model the impacts of their location, the power output of their antenna, and they will have to provide that to the RA. If the RA is satisfied, they can install it. But if that installation is found to be not compliant with that, or creating a problem in terms of safety by breaching the safety standards, they would have to remedy it immediately. And if they don't remedy it, then they'd be subject to enforcement action. So we've added some controls in to make sure our safe environment remains safe. And we think that's going to be a good way to go forward in terms of supporting the the public interest.
Now, you said 3 to 5%. At what level does it become a concern?
In excess of 100.
Excess of 100. So so when you're saying low, it's down
Single
near
digits. Yes, it's very low.
Okay, so just because like sometimes we throw out numbers and people don't understand it in the context of everything. So for 5G, what are the benefits of it?
Oh, there are a number of benefits. There's economic development. People will be employed in installing and maintaining these new networks. It is very, I'll say, innovation prone, I would say, or it facilitates innovation. As an example, challenges that you might have on the 4G. 4G has a saturation limit of about 1,000 customers per square kilometer. So if you think of cut match, you can easily have more than 1,000 people at cut match, and people may have even experienced that, but that's directly as a result of the technology. 5G can support 1 million people per square kilometer. And in terms of bandwidth, the theoretical limit of 4G is 1.8 gigabits per second, and for 5G is 20 gigabits per second. So 5G also offers another alternative to having a fiber optic connection to your business, your premise. So hopefully it will bring new innovation and also increased competition, which the benefits of which should flow to the consumers.
Right. I know I've experienced some of those problems at cut match and covering football matches down at the stadium because everyone's all packed in. You have easily more than 1,000 people there. Everything seems to go to a crawl, especially at the start of a match or at halftime or after a goal. Everyone's shooting video and photos and posting it all at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a direct result of the limitations of the technology.
Right. Michelle White asked, would results of the test be made public so the public can access it on the RA site?
Yes, they are already public. So if you go to our website and if you go to the electronic communications sector and go to administrative determinations, if you look at the radio frequency or RF and 5G safety final report, in Appendix D, you'll find the assessment that we did. We measured 34 points across the entire country, and it's there for your consumption.
All right, great. When do you expect local companies to start rolling out 5G? I know they've been chomping at the bit a bit to get it out there, but when do you expect that we can see the benefits of this?
Well, I mean, it is the latest technology, so I would expect that it won't be too far into the future, but ultimately it's up to the sectoral providers. No one could do anything up until this point, but now that they can, I expect those that have an interest in doing it, because not everyone wants to do it, will probably do it fairly soon. But I mean, building a network isn't a very fast thing, so maybe in 6 months or something, maybe less. Who knows? Or maybe there's a staggered approach. It's up to them how they wish to roll it out.
Now, the third part of your news that you rolled out yesterday was issuing 3 new telecommunications licenses. Um, who were they and what are they for?
Okay, so I'll start with the classes of licenses. So we issued 3 licenses. 2 of them are iCalls. That's what we call them. They are integrated communications operating licenses, and one was issued to Paradise Mobile Limited, and the other one was issued to Wave Bermuda Limited, who trades as Horizon Communications. The third one is a subcall, which is submarine communications operating license, and that was issued to someone that we're familiar with that has decided to come back to Bermuda's market as a cable and wireless. So we're happy to have them return to Bermuda's market, and they will be providing international connectivity. So with the existing connectivity we had and this increased connectivity, Bermuda should be well positioned to have very high bandwidth available. And just as we wanted to see competition at the retail level, we'd like to see competition at the international connectivity level as well. And that license facilitates that.
So I guess like people are always excited when we get competition in the market and hopefully drive down prices. But who are the people behind Paradise Mobile and Wave Bermuda?
Okay, well, I have to remember the names. Well, fundamentally, I think there are 3 entrepreneurs that are driving Paradise, and likewise, I think there are 3 entrepreneurs driving Horizon. They've gotten different sources of, how they are financing, and they have different operating models. We did have a public consultation on their licenses, so I think all of their information is available, and that's also on our website. So people can feel free to dig into it.
Right. So one of them is Gilbert Artie Darrow, and he's been looking to be able to go forward. This process took like a year to complete. Why did it take so long?
Yeah, so the challenge is that we had to build some tools. So the licensing regime for iCalls, we had to build that. That had the previous iCall holders, they were granted licenses from the government before the RA came into existence. So the RA had to build new tools to allow people to apply, to be vetted. Our process actually contemplates that for iCalls in particular, that there's a specific window that you can apply in. So we had to give notice that people, a reasonable notice, so that people knew that they could apply. And then once they applied, we had to evaluate their applications, because just because you apply doesn't mean you're going to get a license, because they are a finite resource. And then once that's done, the iCall itself doesn't entitle the carrier to have spectrum. They can apply for spectrum, but they don't necessarily have the right to spectrum. So the carriers have applied for spectrum, and we're in the process of evaluating that, because sometimes people request something that someone else has or whatever, and we have to help them navigate that in terms of getting alternatives and stuff, and or maybe cutting down the amount of bandwidth that they're requesting, etc. Because we do need to be as frugal as possible, because we don't want to be wasteful of bandwidth. Spectrum is a natural resource and needs to be managed that way. And then once all that's done, and they have all of the spectrum that they need, they usually spec their equipment and buy their equipment, because the equipment a lot of times is configured to match the bandwidth that you're allowed to use, not the bandwidth, the bands that you're allowed to use. So it is a little bit of an arduous process, and I do have sympathy for them on that side of it, but we're definitely working hard to make sure they can come to market. because they will offer value to Bermuda, we believe. But on the flip side of it, we have to do our due diligence. We have to ensure that what they're asking for is reasonable. And in some cases, we had to build tools from scratch. So if you add all those together, that's why it's taken a bit of time.
Yeah, when you talk about bandwidth, I don't think like the average person understands that each iCall holder has a certain band that they're limited to, so they're not impeding on somebody else's. So how does that work, and how do you decide who gets what bandwidth?
Well, we have a spectrum assignment process, and we have spectrum divided into two categories. The first is non-high demand spectrum, and that literally is like not a lot of demand for it. So it's really on a first come, first serve basis. And then we have a high demand spectrum process. And that one, if someone requests that, because it's likely that multiple entities would want that, we provide a notice that someone is requesting what we call HDS, and other people can express an interest in it. Now, non-HDS is at no cost to use, but HDS does have a fee associated with it, and yeah, largely that's how it works. And once they have their spectrum, they're free to go ahead and operate. There are some exemptions in there, as what's called industrial, scientific, and medical ISM bands. Those are currently free to use in Bermuda. You use them at your own risk. They're not licensed to any individual person or company. And a good example of that is your Wi-Fi router. It uses ISM, but because other people are using ISM, that's why you'll see that routers will do what's called frequency hopping, and they'll switch when they detect interference to different frequencies. But it's all in that free and unlicensed space.
Yeah. So in this process, what were the major complaints, if any, about the new companies getting their license that you had to look at?
Yeah, the main concern was related to 5G, that these new applicants may come in and deploy 5G. And there were some requests to not grant licenses on that basis. But an iCall doesn't limit you to doing wireless. You can have an iCall and do just fixed line service. You can do any kind of communication service. So it's ultimately up to them to make an application as to what they want to do, and then the RA would consider it during the application process. And if someone wants to deploy 5G, we had already put that in our work plan, and from 2 years ago, I think. So pre-pandemic, we had already planned to do this work, and the timing of it wasn't fantastic, but the pandemic issues aren't even over yet. So we needed to press on with our work. We did the assessment of 5G, and now basically any iCall can use it if they follow the rules.
I've got one last question, and I'll give you a chance to have some last words here. For Paradise Mobile, it seems like most of the directors or all the directors are from Canada. What's the Bermuda connection, and how can a company where the directors are Canadian set up in Bermuda?
I mean, it's just like any other company that wishes to come to Bermuda. The only difference is that they want to have a telecoms business rather than insurance business. You just apply to the register of companies, and you apply for the type of license you need as a foreign-owned company. And if the register sees that you are a fit person to do business in Bermuda, then it's fine with us.
Okay. And last words on the three topics we discussed, or something else you want to add in there?
No, just a quick recap. So we reduced the electricity rates. This is the second year in a row that we've reduced electricity rates. We have lifted the moratorium, but have implemented some safety controls. And we have also licensed new entities to enter the market in electronic communications to increase competition. And yet all the benefits flow to the consumers.
Right. Okay. Well, we thank you, Denton Williams, who's the Chief Executive of the Regulatory Authority, and appreciate you explaining a little bit more things about your announcement from yesterday. And again, if people want more information, they should go to the RA website, which is www.ra.bm.
ra.pm.
Thank you. All right. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and on behalf of Burr News, wishing you a very beautiful afternoon.